Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Matt, you and I watched, I believe, the entirety of Donald Trump's press conference yesterday. Yes. He's back, baby.
It's amazing. It's incredible to watch.
So it's about 90 minutes. First 45 minutes were basically a monologue.
Yes. And a wide-ranging monologue.
So just to pluck out what's important from what's not important, the most important thing that happened in the press conference was Trump doubling, tripling, and quadrupling down on the idea that if the hostages are not released by January 20th, a hell will break out in the Middle East. And I view that, I don't know how you view it, because he kept saying, do I have to spell it out for you what I'm talking about? And the answer is he doesn't, but I'm not sure that people really understand what it means when he says hell will break out in the Middle East. The only way hell breaks out in the Middle East in the way that he is talking about is some kind of direct confrontation with Iran. Because there is no way to break out hell against Hamas.
Yeah, I mean,
in that, or the Houthis.
There's more that can be done, I think, based on statements by the former NSA McMaster, that we could be probably doing more with military assistance, intelligence assistance, vis-a-vis IDF operations in Gaza. So that could be one element, but I do agree.
But that's not hell. Whatever hell is, increasing military and intelligence cooperation isn't hell.
Well, Trump is not going to say he's going to unleash purgatory. Yeah. This is Donald Trump. And if you watch the 85-minute press conference as you and I did, you were reminded of the rhetoric and the reality. And so it takes a fine tooth comb here to go through and say, okay, what is exactly is he saying? I thought it was very important that when he noticed that his friend Steve Witkoff, the special envoy to the Middle East, was in the back of the room, he summoned Witkoff up to the lectern and asked him to talk about the state of the negotiations. And this is noticeable for two reasons. The first is Trump is unusual in that he's a politician who's willing to give up the microphone. He does this at the rallies a lot.
As long as he gets it back.
Well, he's always going to get it back, right? He's always, but it's interesting to watch him over the course of the past decade, because he'll always say, "Hey, why don't you say a few words?" And I think there's a showman quality to that, right? He's the ringmaster, but there's also a weird kind of deference or something, like he's willing to give it up for a moment. I guess you're right, knowing that he's going to get it back. But the second reason that Witkoff's presence and statements were noteworthy was this was clearly top of mind for Trump. And I think the contrast with Trump's statements on Ukraine is important as well. Trump has dropped, "I'm going to solve the Ukraine war in 24 hours, right? He said at the press conference yesterday, it's a tough problem. No, yes, it is. Whereas with the Middle East, he's saying, look, if we don't get those hostages out before I'm inaugurated, there's going to be hell to pay. So that's a day one action item.
Let's just unpack this. The reason I wanted to talk about the hostages first, and then I think Ukraine, it's important to bring up second, is, of course, that the big news that came out of it is he's going to invade Greenland, he's going to take the Panama Canal, he's going to annex Canada. And I think that's where you can see the way in which Trump is both the same person he was in 2016, 2017, and immeasurably more confident and weirdly skilled than he was as a public presence at the beginning of his first term, because he now effortlessly dominates the conversation, and he sends the media down wild goose on a wild goose chase for the worst possible thing
that he could be saying. Chase.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean it's interesting because does it matter geopolitically whether or not he makes a deal with Denmark that transfers sovereignty of Greenland to the United States? Yeah, I mean, it does. Obviously, it would be kind of a big thing. We haven't really done that kind of thing in 100 years, but um, it's as
John,
though,
you say
yeah,
doesn't matter. I just want to, just in
yeah,
terms of the
yeah.
press wild goose chase, the Times characterized it as one of the most frightening thing he said was about the U.S. acquiring more land.
That's what I mean. See, he is setting them down the rabbit hole of Trump. He is
But
trying to
also,
encourage Trump derangement
attaining
syndrome.
Greenland is Trump is far from the first president to suggest that. Also, that's
Right.
the other weird thing about the overreaction, right, about Greenland is that it has been on the agenda every so on and off for 100 or so years, just
Right.
because it has that strategic.
So we should,
after World War II, Harry
Yeah.
Truman was like, "What are we going to do about
Yeah.
Greenland?"
Yeah.
we should try to
to
parse these out again.
Yeah.
This press conference was so wide ranging. So, and we started with the hostages, then less than 10 minutes in, we're talking about MAGA Fest Destiny,
Yeah.
which I do want to talk about at length. But
Right.
before we even get there, I want to start with another contrast, which is between Trump and Biden. Because I think one reason Trump has been holding these press conferences since the election is to just put a pin in the fact that he is up to the task to take care that the laws are faithfully executed under the Constitution, whereas Biden is not and is in hiding. So you think about Trump on his feet giving this, it's Shakespearean monologues. You typically deal with one problem facing the character, right? But not Trump's. Trump's monologues, they range from many problems. You've got economics on one hand, then you go to foreign policy, then you go to lawfare. Anyway, so you have that part of it. But then he's answering these questions from all these reporters, not all of them friendly. For the back half, what is Biden doing? Biden's sitting in the Oval Office for one exit interview. One. And it's not on TV. It is with Susan Page of USA Today, and that was published. And I think we can talk about that later as well, but that split screen is very important, and it speaks to why Trump is going to be the president in 2 weeks.
Important because Susan Page is Parson Weems in this interview. You can read it. They do actually have film of it. You can watch it on the USA Today site, but I read the transcript. And, she's sort of like gently correcting him when he makes mistakes, and she's not following up when he says things like, I created the best. I mean, he says stuff that is very Trumpian, weirdly. It's sort of like, I solved inflation. Everything is better now. Our alliances are in fantastic shape. And there's like no pushback whatsoever. So he chose wisely in the absolutely pathetic, sentimentalist approach of Susan Page as Biden goes out the door. And the contrast is Trump, I think, is trying to encourage his enemies in the media to go insane about him again, because they shot at him and shot at him and shot at him, not only without proper result, although you could say the 2020 election was the proper result for them because he was not reelected in 2020, but they arguably got him elected the second time here because of their derangement and the absolute monomaniacal Ahabian pursuit of him as the white whale. And I think maybe he thinks that will be helpful to him. He is not scared of them. He is not courting Maggie Haberman anymore. He has a White House chief of staff who is going to make sure that his staff doesn't have different reporters on different speed dials to report on who's having what fight in the hallway outside the Oval Office, as was the case in 2019 and in 2017 and in 2018. And reading through the New York Times's running account of the press conference as it was going on was like reading people going, he's doing it again. He's lying again. He's saying untrue things, and he is making claims that are not verifiable. And it's like, when are you people are you ever gonna learn? Like Lucy and the football. Now,
the answer is
never. And okay.
Well, so my favorite is the framing of the Greenland debate, which we should talk about more at another time. But the framing of the Greenland debate as the crisis with Denmark. It's the first crisis of the Trump presidency. It's not even about the crisis in Denmark. I don't think that's the way most Americans, certainly most Greenlanders, interpret this debate. But there are other pieces of news that I just want to mention, other than the foreign policy piece, which is clearly dominant in the press conference and may actually end up dominating Trump's second term in a way that people aren't fully expecting. Now, the first is political news. Trump over the weekend, as we discussed on the podcast, came out in favor of the one beautiful mega MAGA bill, which is the one reconciliation bill that will cover everything from taxes to immigration to energy, desired by the House Republicans. At this press conference, he continued stepping away from that bill, which he started in an interview with our friend Hugh Hewitt on Monday, saying that, whatever works, basically. Typical of Trump to kind of leave himself the most room possible. He's now saying some people like two bills, and that's the Senate. Republicans would prefer two bills in order to get some early wins on the board legislatively. The first bill covering immigration and energy and defense, and then keeping the tax stuff to the second bill. So Trump has kind of moved away from his support for the one mega MAGA bill. That's the political news. But then I also want to comment on some of the economic news that Trump dealt with. And I think it's overlooked because, as you say, John, the media is chasing these, the Canadian
annexation
of Canadian geese, as Seth put it, right? They're chasing the Canadian geese. And I think Trump's economic message is very important. He talked about inflation. He talked about how he's going to bring down inflation mainly through using our energy. He really went after Biden's decree, as we've called it here, that restricting or banning energy development on some of these coastal offshore energy fields in the ocean. So he went after that, and then he really kind of broadened it to a critique of progressivism and its green utopianism in order to limit carbon-based fuels. And of course, the best part was when he was talking about how he's going to protect our gas heaters.
That wasn't the best part. The whales were the best part.
Oh, I forgot about it. Okay. No, but okay. I want to talk about that too. Okay. But the gas heater part was great because it involved physical comedy. Typically you're laughing at just the way Trump formulates things. But in this case, when he was talking about the difference between gas heaters and electric heaters, he was complaining that with electric heaters, you start itching, and he kind of itched himself. With gas heaters, there's no itch, and so that's why he's going to sign a bill preserving our ability to have gas heat. And again, I think it's an important measure that he's discussing, but he does it in a way that is kind of loony, but also kind of funny. And then, of course, John, as you say, there was the whales, and I'll let you describe that.
The windmills. Yes. I just want you to know, the windmills are driving the whales crazy, Matt. So
that was the best.
Wind farm.
No, he's talking about how the offshore windmills are correlated with these beached whales in Massachusetts, and I've noticed that story too. But he said, then he goes, and then he just says, the windmills are driving the whales crazy. Obviously. That's the button of the joke, is the obviously.
And of course, what's funny about this is it's actually a perfect environmentalist story in a way, like horror movie story. Are we killing off the horribly endangered whales with these massive capitalist government supported wind farms, in the water. And of course that story will never be told by Hollywood because it violates the green agenda that is more important. But it is funny that he is now, sort of the Teddy Roosevelt of the whale. He is the conservationist of whale culture and against the depredations of the encroaching
Wind farms.
Wind farms, yeah. So the whales are being driven crazy. The heaters are making us itch. And so...
And we didn't even get to the fluoride yet.
And we haven't got... right.
Yeah,
So,
well, he didn't bring up fluoride.
But can I
but
just say, I don't think, John, you said that he's somehow intentionally trying to drive the media crazy. I agree with you that he's not scared of them, that he doesn't care. I don't think it's intentional. I think it's a leopard and his spots, and this is what he would say no matter what.
The reason that it struck me as I was watching that there's been a fundamental shift in American culture from 2017 to 2025, which is not surprising. It's almost a decade, and enormous changes have happened in this country. President in the middle, COVID, inflation, all of this, is that the gatekeepers, remember this also happened the morning that Meta announced the end of its content moderation rules. The gatekeepers have lost the confidence of the great American middle. Either the great American middle doesn't care about the gatekeeping, or it has actively turned against gatekeeping in general. That was not true in 2016, 2017. Obviously, the gatekeepers in the media have been facing their their ongoing obsolescence since the rise of Craigslist and the browser, and all of that since the late 80s, early 90s. But they still had the capacity to halt him in his tracks, to get 1 million people to airports in the week, in the first week of his presidency when he announced the Muslim ban and that kind of thing. And the gatekeeping, showing that the gatekeeping is impotent or almost non-existent now, is so much to his benefit that I don't believe that it's entirely organic. Meaning, it's not just that he's the leopard, these are his spots, and he's doing what he always did. There was something knowing about it. I don't know how to define it. It just felt like it as I was watching it, like they were standing there, David Sanger of the New York Times and various other people, and he was playing the reporters like a piano. They weren't asking the questions that they wanted to ask, really. They were asking the questions that were
where they sort of demanded him. Like part of this is that the reporters are, I don't want to say enjoying this, although I think some of them clearly are, right? Veteran reporters are enjoying covering a White House that, is getting, I just saw the flash news that the French foreign minister has responded to Trump's threat to invade Greenland. So certainly some reporters are really, and the BBC is...
That's terrible. He praised France. He said during the
why does France have to do?
He said the French did a really good job on the cathedral.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very nice. He was very complimentary about the reconstruction of Notre Dame.
He was. But so I think some reporters are enjoying it. But yesterday at the press conference, they were pulling him back to the microphone, asking questions about things they had asked 100 times that get these quotes. Like when Steve Witkoff was at the microphone, Trump was sort of trying to get them to pay attention to the guy at the microphone. At one point, he was talking up Steve Witkoff as an envoy, as a negotiator, and saying how, we have all these smart people in the U.S. government, but nobody knows how to talk. I have the guys that know how to talk. Listen to Steve. That was the theme. And at one point he said, great negotiators are very rare. They're like great surgeons. So we got another, kernel of wisdom out of it. He was trying to get people to talk to the people that he's going to be sending over there. And they kept shouting over Steve's head and going, well, what did you mean by hell to pay? What does hell break out mean? And that's when Trump said, well, do you need me to define it for you? And they just sort of pulled him back to the microphone. And then that was basically it. And then he shook Steve's hand and he was like, well, you did a good job or something like that. They are addicted no less to the spectacle and their ability to partake in the spectacle than they were back in 2016, and now they seem to be doing it with a bit less horror in their voices. And so it's the addiction is almost a comical thing that you're watching people say hell again, say hell breaks out again.
Yeah, but I'm telling you that live blog on the New York Times site was very telling to me, because that was Peter Baker and my friend Maggie Haberman, my old friend Maggie Haberman.
Sanger was there,
and Sanger was there, and he then wrote the right through story about the press conference. But it was this. Oh my God! It's sort of like he has risen. Glenn Close has risen from the bathtub yet again to try to stab Ann Archer in the face in Fatal Attraction. He's back, and what are we going? Oh my God! What are we going to do?
There is some shock and awe in this. I mean, just from a perspective different than the news writers of the New York Times. Just think about what he's talking about. Panama, the Panama Canal. It's straight out of Reagan's populist playbook in 1976. We built it. We paid for it. It's ours. He went on to say that the reason Jimmy Carter lost the 1980 election wasn't the hostages in Iran. It wasn't inflation. It was giving up the Panama Canal, signing the Panama Canal treaties. Incidentally, that is William F. Buckley Jr.'s view. William F. Buckley Jr. defended the Panama Canal treaties in the 1970s, and then said retrospectively that while it was the right thing to do, it probably cost Carter the election to Reagan.
Well, we should talk about that, because it's an interesting, larger point about politics and how politics, things that people do, have knock-on effects and unintended consequences.
Yeah.
So, Buckley supported the idea of retrocessing the Panama Canal area back to Panama, which we did for $1, which Trump kept saying was $1, and we built
not
it.
A good deal.
30,000 people died building the canal, and so for $1, this is so outrageous. But what it revealed about Carter and the kind of president that Carter thought that he was, and the view of the world that Carter wanted to impart, was very much present when Iran fell, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, and when word came that there was possibly a Soviet brigade in Cuba, all of which happened, in and the fall of Nicaragua to the Sandinistas, all of which happened in the year 1979. That imagine a world in which Carter hadn't given up the Panama Canal.
Well, it's a difference in style,
right?
I mean, it's Carter, Obama, Biden. Apologetic liberals. America needs to withdraw,
restrain itself.
Restrain itself. We're the problem somehow. Trump is now aligning himself with Reagan, unapologetic American nationalism, and interest in the American interest, pursuing it, even if it means we hold on to things like the Panama Canal. That was Reagan's argument, and it now seems to be Trump's argument, resurrected, at a time when we thought that this debate was over. So it's an important stylistic difference, as well as an illustration of the kind of knockoff effects you're talking about.
And to talk about knockoff effects, let's go back to the hell breaking out.
Hell breaking loose.
Hell breaking loose. When you're Trump and you're looking at the world that is going to be, in your hands in 13 days, I think. Is it 13 days? 12 days?
12 days.
You're looking at an Iran that has been denuded of its capacity to strike back if you strike it. The Israeli raid with support of America and all of that took out Iran's air defenses and capacity to mount an offensive action, as far as we know, that's not simply terroristic, in response to a military strike against it. Biden is sitting here in his senescence with the opportunity to take out the Iranian nuclear program and to harm Iran for what it has done for the last 15, 16 months in the shipping, hostages, Hezbollah, obviously Hamas, and then Iran's loss of Syria. To punish it, to put the world on record that America will not tolerate this, and to say, give us these hostages, or in 10 minutes, get the Hamas to release the hostages in 10 minutes, or we are taking out your oil platforms and your export abilities with oil, for example. And he's not doing it. I don't see why Trump wouldn't. That's I think what he's saying about the hell breaking out.
Well,
he
but
is
that
sending okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
my only problem, excuse me, my only problem with that is that I want Trump to do it whether or not the hostages are released. Right.
Right. I understand that.
I don't want Iran to get a pass just because
Right.
The hostages are released, and Iran is now ramping up drills around Natanz. Because it's a real possibility.
Okay, so I understand your point, but that is his negotiate. That is his chip, right? The chip isn't, we're really going to come after you, Hamas. Like,
Right.
as you say, as Matt said, McMaster, there are things that the American government could do to make Israel's job much easier that apparently we are not doing. But those are additive. Those are not transformative. And particularly, by the way, we could take out the Houthis. We could take out the Houthis in 2 days.
The Gaza thing also falls into that category that Abe's talking about, because Trump, on the one hand, Trump has been suggesting that, forget about humanitarian aid and forget about all these things that keep getting in the way and delaying things. I'm just going to say to Israel, go in and do what you need to do. But all indications are that that's probably going to be his policy, right? Whether or not we get a hostage deal. There's all these things. The point of Trump making all these statements to say, America is back, we understand our power, and we're going to use it, is that I think he wants these to be his policies. And that's why the question of what does hell break out mean is an interesting one, because the general threat is just being back in office. We expect his policies to be, that way in Gaza. I personally think that it is more dangerous to not take out Iran's nuclear program for the U.S. than it is to send the bombers. And very rarely have I looked at a military strike or something of that consequence and said not taking action is very clearly the most dangerous, but it is. And so I think that there's just this consensus that there's things being left undone. Like there's being food left on the table, points left on the board, whatever you want to use, whatever metaphor you want to use, that Trump is going to come in and collect on day one. And I don't know how much is going to be left over for punishment for hell breaking loose. The hell breaking loose is his new set of policies.
Right. Now, even more important is the fact that he kept mentioning, and it's important that he did so, that there are Americans among the hostages. Because again, in terms of knockoff effects, assuming that the hostage deal is not reached by the time he is inaugurated, it will be vitally important for him to do what he's talking about here to prevent further hostage taking. What happened during the Biden administration? Russia kept taking American hostages. Brittany Griner, Evan Gershkovich. I mean, we have a world in which there were no consequences for countries. And then, of course, it happened with Hamas in Gaza facing the Biden administration. They took these hostages. They could have figured out who was an American citizen and let them loose instantly because they were scared of the United States. And they weren't, were they? They weren't scared. Trump's got to scare the world. This is part of the corrective to Biden's weakness. It will be very helpful to him in terms of, kind of prophylactic care for him to wage hell, to prevent, this is my point about the Panama Canal, to prevent further provocative actions against the United States during his presidency.
Yeah. The madman theory of international relations is clearly something that Trump subscribes to, and it informs a lot of his moves and rhetoric, including his threat that all hell will break loose. And of course, I don't even think Trump knows what it means exactly. I mean, we'll find out. We'll see what happens, and maybe the threat alone will be enough to produce results. It's not clear. We should talk a little bit about some of the other foreign policy aspects. Again, I'm calling it MAGAfest destiny. We're going to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico. Apparently, we're going to change it to the Gulf of America. I have not done the necessary investigation to see how that works. Obviously, cartography is kind of a decentralized industry,
particularly now that you don't need an atlas.
Right.
Whoa!
So
just go online.
If we lean on Google Maps, and we
Obama,
haul in the Rand McNally executives.
Go to the what was it, Mount McKinley? So there's a process.
He also wants to. Yes, he wants to
rename
reversal.
Rename.
That would be a return to form to get Denali back to Mount McKinley, his favorite president of his predecessors. But the news yesterday was the Gulf of Mexico will be renamed the Gulf of America. I'm fine with that. I think that's great.
Okay, I gotta say, we in New York have this habit because the mayor has the power to do this, of renaming things. And of course, the most famous one was the renaming of 6th Avenue as Avenue of the Americas. That happened 60 years ago.
Yes.
There is not a person in the world who calls 6th Avenue the Avenue of the Americas, except the envelope.
Well, it's funny. Right? I was thinking about this in relation to the Twitter X switch.
Yeah.
It's another rename that people still have trouble with.
Yeah.
Also, where I live, the Washington Commanders, I still occasionally refer to them.
Aren't they going to rename them? Wasn't there?
No, I don't think they're going to.
Okay.
There was some talk when the new ownership came in, but now we're also excited about the team that I think we're fine with the Commanders now. But of course, I still refer to them as the Redskins. And I think that there's something innately conservative about that habit.
This is what I'm saying. In New York, we have the Triborough Bridge, renamed the RFK Bridge, the 59th Street Bridge, which is the greatest name of any bridge, even though it's actually technically called the Queensboro Bridge, now called the Ed Koch Bridge, and the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, now called the Hugh Carey Tunnel. Nobody is ever going to refer to any of those crossings.
Contrary.
Carey Bridge, or the Koch Bridge,
the New York
or the Mario M. Cuomo.
I was just going to
say,
forgetting the Governor Mario M. Cuomo Bridge, which was renamed by Andrew Cuomo.
Right, but no one calls the Tappan Zee the Mario M. Cuomo
the
Bridge.
most successful name change, and maybe this can be a kind of a guide for Trump and the Republicans, has been National Airport to Reagan Airport. And for a time there was like a hybrid, and I think still the technical name is Ronald Reagan National Airport.
Right.
But people now call it Reagan Airport.
Airport name changes take. I mean,
maybe it's a thing with airports.
Yeah.
Really, though, this is again
because when you travel, you can't mess around.
Yeah. But we have to know how this applies to major bodies of water.
Yes.
because
why don't we rename the oceans?
I do want to see this happen.
Yes.
Why isn't the Atlantic Ocean the American Ocean? I don't know. We could just call it.
That idea was surfaced at the Continental dining room table just yesterday. Even this is the sort of conversations that Trump inspired. So that's just one small piece, though. There are other allied countries that Trump threatened, and I think we should talk about them as well. There is also Canada, right? So I want to kind of explain or provide an exegesis of Trump's stance on Canada. Now, the headlines are all come out of this question where he was asked, can you say, Mr. President-elect, that you will not use military or economic coercion to integrate Canada into the United States? And he said, no, I'm not going to say that. Now, later he said, he was asked again, because to what Seth is talking about, this is what people are fixated on. He was asked the same question again, and he did say, Canada, no military for Canada. And I think that kind of speaks to what Trump is up to. I think Trump has been convinced that the prospects of an economic union with Canada, similar to an EU type arrangement, are beneficial. Now, part of his rhetoric cuts against this, because at the same time he's saying we're going to absorb Canada into the United States, he's also saying we don't need it.
We don't need your lumber.
We don't.
He
Yeah,
said,
we don't
we
need
don't
your
need your
milk.
lumber. We have more than enough lumber. We don't need your cars.
We don't
We
need
don't
your
need your
milk.
lousy cars. I want
Right.
cars to be made in America. And then he also said this really bizarre thing. He said, we spend hundreds of billions
Yeah.
of dollars to protect Canada.
I'm not sure what that
What did that mean?
has.
What was
Whether
that?
it's a
What was
defense
that?
subsidy because
I don't know,
we
but
have a
whatever
larger
it is,
military or
it ain't
Coast
hundreds
Guard.
of, yeah, it ain't
Yeah.
hundreds of billion. We don't even spend hundreds of, we practically spend 800 billion on our own defense altogether. So we're not spending half of that protecting Canada, unless you think that the American defense budget, which I guess it does in some
Well,
fundamental
maybe
sense.
that's his point. Maybe his point is that Canada is protected because it sits next door to the
I
United
think
States
he is
America.
helping Pierre Poilievre, the conservative, the person who leads the Conservative Party in Canada, with Justin Trudeau stepping down. I mean, Poilievre is almost certainly going to win an election later this year, but his party's up by 25 points. But Trudeau arranged this resignation so that his party could install a new leader before there was an election. And Trump, by going at this, has given Poilievre a little bit of a nationalist tinge, because he's like, of course we're not going to be the 51st state. Canada is a proud, independent country. He gets to be a little bit of a Canadian nationalist.
Well, he's using it. I mean, to your point about helping him, he's using it against Trudeau. He's turning it into a talking point. Look, when this guy is prime minister, they're talking about Canada not even being a country anymore.
Yeah. Oh, right. I think, but so I differ in this. I think Trump is serious, and what I think he's serious about is this economic integration, which apparently is being advocated by Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary of Shark Tank, who is a prominent Canadian businessman and also part of the Trump unofficial circle of advisors. And so on the one hand, I think Trump likes this idea somehow of absorbing Canada, because as he told Hugh Hewitt in a kind of an aside that it was very revealing, he said part of America's golden age, which will commence when he becomes a president again, will be territorial expansion. I mean, he's thinking this. But on the one hand, his economic nationalism that he voiced in the press conference undercuts the necessity to have an economic union with Canada, you would think, right? And the second point is, this is the America First guy basically trying to create or putting his capital behind a MAGA NAFTA, right? I mean, the idea of North American Union was originated by Ronald Reagan in his announcement address when he began running for the 1980 campaign. He says it right there. You can look at the address. There are 3 paragraphs. They are visionary because NAFTA came out of that. But I think Reagan's ultimate hopes were exactly what Trump is talking about now, that this economic union would eventually be something even more important, even leading to something like a political arrangement as well. So
I don't want Canada.
I know.
Let me just lay this out, because Canada is a country beset by politically correct woke pressures of a kind that we have only lately begun to experience. Quebec has for 50 years been led by a kind of ideologically separatist thought process, French first, all of that. You have First Nations activism throughout Canada that, again, like makes our own indigenous issues look like child's play. And just taking this seriously for a second, this is tourist that we don't need Canadian political culture infecting American political culture. No. It would be like, in some ways, even though the Conservatives are going to win there this year, it would be a little like having 5 Democratic states, come into the union without any Republican states or something like that. It could shift. It's 40 million people. It's a lot of people.
We don't need to
a lot of area.
There's no reason to give Canada electoral votes.
No, I know. I'm just saying we can
just have them as like a territory. But by the way, I think the most impressive thing,
there are Guam. There are big. There are
our American
Guam.
Samoa. Yeah. But as somebody pointed out to me, Ron DeSantis has presided over more Stanley Cup championships than Justin Trudeau. And that, I think, is at the heart of all of this. Canada is now bad at hockey. And Trump
This
wants to make
this is a
Canada
very
great
important
again.
point.
The hate mail you're going to get, Seth,
This is a very important
for
point.
saying that. I just
That
want to make
was
sure
their
people know
yeah.
it was Seth
If
who said that,
curling,
not
if
me.
Florida becomes the champion area of curling, that is when Canada really is like
Right.
falling into.
So unlikely Canada will become part of the United States.
Yes.
That Trump is continuing to troll the world by suggesting this. But I do think there may be some type of economic arrangement that is reached during his term.
Okay, we should talk about Europe also,
Yes,
because
and that's the next thing on the list, right?
so Europe first, Ukraine will put to one side for a second. He is now upping the ante on his commitment to NATO, because he now says 5%. Every one of these countries should be spending 5% on their defense, not 2% on their defense. The troubles are close to them. We have this thing, he said, called the ocean that keeps us out of trouble on the European continent. They need to protect themselves
The American
against
Ocean.
Putin. Right, the American Ocean. That's why it should be called the American Ocean. If they need to protect themselves against Putin, or believe they need to protect themselves against Putin, let them pay for it. So meanwhile, if you read Biden's interview in USA Today, he's like, I've strengthened our alliances and we are now more unified than we've ever been before. And the person who won the election in 2024 is talking about making a demand on GDP in these countries that we don't meet. I mean, I don't know where we are. We're less than 2%
No.
of our. No,
I think we're about 3%.
We're 3. Okay, so we're at 3. He wants them to do 5,
and I think he's implying that we should do 5 as well. There was an aside where he said, "Yeah, why not?" I think he wants to increase. We know he wants to increase the defense budget. We don't know quite how much he wants to increase it or where he wants to increase it.
Okay, but he is putting Europe on notice.
Right.
Again, not that Europe needs to be any more on edge about Trump becoming president, even though, he's got friends in Europe that he didn't have in 2017, right? He's got Giorgia Meloni. I don't know. I mean, maybe he doesn't have that many friends, but so they're on edge. And then came what he said about Ukraine.
Can we talk about Greenland before Ukraine?
Yeah, you want to talk about Green? Yes.
Currently, Greenland is owned by Denmark, which is in Europe, so it falls under the bucket of European issues. And here too, Trump is doubling down, and I think even more serious than he is about any economic integration with Canada. He talked about the geopolitical importance of Ukraine, which is true. The fact that the Arctic is becoming more of a space for great power competition as the Arctic becomes warmer. There are obviously energy resources and mineral resources in Greenland. It is close to us. It's kind of a bridge in a way to the North Atlantic and to Scandinavia and Russia. So he discussed that. He talked about how it's really, this is up to the Greenlanders, who have been part of Denmark for some time now, but many of them don't want to be part of Denmark. And at the same time as his press conference, Don Jr. was in Greenland with some fellow MAGA personalities, including Charlie Kirk. And it was not an official visit, but I'm sure his dad knew it was going to take place.
Well, he mentioned it.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, I think he mentioned that. He said Don is there today. Something. So
this, I think, is a sign that an idea that was first floated in Trump's first term will be pursued in his second. And here, too, we get a sense of these zeitgeist change, right? Because when Trump brought up Greenland in his first term, it was a good idea. But it was universally panned. Everyone, it was just part of the daily outrage. We moved on to other controversies. In this case, are there people who are panning the idea? For sure. at the same time, I think it's taken more seriously than it was I think it was in 2018 or 2019 when he talked about it. So 5 or 6 years ago.
I think his presidency will be, as would anyone's, too overtaken by immediate events to even get anywhere near Greenland.
That could be the case, but when you're talking about territorial expansion, that he has this interest in territorial expansion, and is sort of laying it out, taking back the Panama Canal, all of that stuff. I am struck by, he mentioned during the campaign that his intention in 2026, which will be the 250th anniversary of the creation of the United States, is to have a nationalist jamboree throughout 2026, sort of like the bicentennial, obviously 49 years ago. Think about the America that Joe Biden began to govern in 2021. We were still sort of like half indoors from COVID. The entire liberal establishment was apologizing for the existence of America, from the 1619 Project to the rise of DEI, to the changes in the way in which we discussed incarceration and punishment and the Black experience and all kinds of stuff. And this shift into just outright American nationalism. I don't like the word nationalism. I don't think it's really fitting to describe America. Nationalism is a European phenomenon with a very distinct European root. So we have different, we have a different kind of relation to our patriotism. But Biden could no more have sought, the annexation of Greenland or the purchase of Greenland or something than he could have flown, given the ideological constraints on his brain, his party, and the entire understanding of the United States.
Well, imagine
governed them.
Imagine America's 250th with President Harris. I mean,
that
would kind of be a dull party, or even an apologetic party, kind of a
or not a party at all.
Right. Not even.
I mean, we have to deal with the complexities of our history.
If we're going to be unburdened by what has been, we can't have a party.
You could have a party that looked forward.
Well, and also, the Declaration does use gendered language. So,
yeah. I mean, it's no. By the way,
she might have a problem with that.
The other thing that happened yesterday was that Jimmy Carter's body was brought to the Capitol Rotunda to lie in state until his funeral on Thursday, and Kamala Harris was the main speaker in the rotunda. Gave a eulogy. Biden will be giving the eulogy at the actual funeral tomorrow. And it was such a bad speech. It was such a lame, cliche-riddled, energyless speech in which she said, in a really remarkable way, that Jimmy Carter was one of those kinds of people who did the work. He did the work, which is one of these liberal leftist phrases about surrendering to present day woke ideology.
It's a DEI workshop indoctrination phrase.
Yeah, exactly. So Jimmy Carter, who was a supporter of segregation at some point in his life, who was a supporter of Lieutenant Calley's, and he did the work. Granted, he became a very liberal president, so I'm not going there. But it was a striking reminder, to me in a weird way, of what we were spared by her defeat, the lifelessness of this moment, which was sort of like her last. It's like her last major moment as vice president, until she runs again or whatever, and she booted it. She completely flunked this challenge.
Tina Brown, the famous editor and kind of activist personality, has a Substack which I enjoy, and she remarked in her newsletter yesterday that she had to Google Tim Walz's first name so quickly had that ticket faded from her memory. And of course, if Tina Brown knows what's hot and what's not, right, in terms of style and politics. So that was very revealing that she had to say that, and I think that's true of most people. It's kind of geez, I'm glad that's over with, right? Certainly, many Democrats don't feel that way, but I think most of the country does.
I just think, even in a grading on the curve sense, when you have the idea that, like, this is a gimme, like having your staff write a beautiful eulogy for Jimmy Carter, a person I revile, but nonetheless, it's not that hard a job. It really isn't. And speaking as somebody who wrote such things as a presidential speechwriter, it's the easiest of assignments. And she couldn't even pull this off. She and her staff could not pull off a decent remembrance of a Democratic president standing in an incredibly solemn setting. It was dark. The coffin is there. She's at a podium, very church-like, not hard to knock it out of the park. And she, basically hit a squib to the pitcher. That was just underhand tossed to the first baseman, and she was out by 30 feet. I mean, it was very.
Did you want to comment on Trump and Ukraine?
Yeah,
before we
yeah.
go.
Well, so I think the main thing, and I think you pointed out, is this is all very easily solvable. Is now off his plate, because it's too much pressure, among other things. Like this is you said you would solve it in 24 hours. Oh, look at you now. But I don't think that he's going to revisit his idea that, he doesn't want this hanging over him. He would prefer not to be spending this money, whatever it is that you want to look at. But I do think it's important to point out that he remains somebody who has not gone where the MAGA movement has gone rhetorically, or where J.D. Vance went rhetorically.
He said bad stuff, though.
He has not. I'm just saying that he has kept his powder more dry than most of the people who are his enthusiastic supporters in the realm of foreign policy. I'm not saying that means that he's going to revisit or change, or that he's not going to change the approach and all of that. But I am struck that he hasn't airily said, well, this is, they're going to have to, Ukraine's just going to have to accept, what scraps Putin throws at them.
But what he did do was empathize with Putin's stated position that, it was
NATO
bringing Ukraine, the
closer to NATO,
the prospect of bringing Ukraine to NATO that put an enemy at their doorstep, and Trump can understand the problem there. That's just pure Kremlin garbage, and it's coming out of,
for him it's Tucker Carlson garbage,
right?
But yeah, I take your point. Maybe I'm like I myself.
No, I've been where you are for a while, and
well, he says that yes, NATO encirclement put Putin in a position where you could see why he invaded, according to Trump. But to John's point, he hasn't adopted the J.D. Vance line from a couple of years ago that I couldn't care less what happens to Ukraine, right? I mean, so he's somewhere in between those two places.
And also, MAGA's lie. He's also not where Musk is, right? Musk has expressed the idea that's also popular in MAGA circles that Zelensky is a scam artist.
Yeah,
that's one of the main critiques of him now, which is, boy, did he pull the wool over our eyes. Never saw somebody pull off a highway.
Well, he has said
like this Zelensky character.
Yeah. Trump has
thing that he hasn't gone there either.
He has called Zelensky the world's greatest salesman. Every time he could write
that line is
Steve Witkoff. Great salesmen are rare, like great surgeons, Matt.
Yeah, but he also has to. He remains the other party on the world's most perfect phone call. I want you to remember that it was with Zelensky that Trump had the perfect phone call that got him impeached the first time. And for him to say that Zelensky is a con artist and a flim-flam artist would ruin the narrative on the perfect phone call. So he does have in his own history a reason to speak more softly about Zelensky, or even more kindly about Zelensky, than the other people in
My
Moscow do.
takeaway from Trump's comments on Ukraine was that removing a path to NATO membership for Ukraine may be on the table in any offer to Putin in order to freeze the war. It's not necessarily a good thing at all, but I also don't think it will be enough because, in truth, what seems to have motivated Putin's concerns about Ukraine isn't so much NATO, but Ukraine's move to join the European Union and to become integrated into the EU and into the Western democracies and into the Western markets, and to kind of pull Ukraine out of the Russo orbit, right? So
that's
the
essentially
NATO
what
concession would
precipitated
not
the
satisfy that
2014
demand.
That's what precipitated the 2014.
Right.
Right. It's always been,
Nation.
ever since the Orange Revolution back in 2004, this has been Putin's concern. And so, I think what the Trump administration is going to realize, and I think there are people who are going into the Trump administration who know this already, is that Putin's not actually interested in ending the war.
Yeah.
He thinks he can win the war. And until he thinks that he is personally in danger, he's not going to end it. And he's not going to give into some negotiating process. And so the real question isn't so much what Trump is going to do on day one with Ukraine. It's what is Trump going to do when he has to recognize that Putin is not interested in a negotiation in 2025.
Right. Matt, I think you have a recommendation for us.
Thank you, John. I do. I've decided I want to read a lot more books with a character who appears in many books, get to know the characters. So, as we know, I'm a fan of the Michael Connelly series with Detective Bosch. I've been rereading the James Bond series. Actually, I'm reading for the first time the Bond series of novels by Ian Fleming. But there's another character who I had just finished a book regarding that I also would like to recommend, and that is the character of Sir Harry Flashman in the series of novels written by George MacDonald Fraser. I am finishing the book Royal Flash, which is the second in the series. Now, I began the series in 2008, reading the first Flashman novel, and it had come highly regarded by writers and critics I respect. But I didn't really, as I recall, I didn't really like it. And so I kind of put the series to his side for many years. But it was just in the past week or so that I decided to, as part of this new obsession with series, for whatever reason, pick up Royal Flash. And I have to say, it's a delight. Flashman is a rogue. He is a bigot. He's a sexist. He's a soldier. He's not that that's a bad quality, but it's kind of just part of his personality. And who gets into all these scrapes in basically Victorian England in the 19th century. And the first Flashman involves his adventures in Afghanistan, funnily enough. But the second one, Royal Flash, has to deal with Flashman's involvement in a plot by Otto von Bismarck to begin Bismarck's career by basically stirring up trouble in Schleswig and Holstein. Speaking of Denmark, another territorial dispute with Denmark. And it's fun. It's a picaresque. It's an adventure. There's laugh out loud funny lines. So I'd recommend the Flashman series beginning with Royal Flash.
Royal Flash, by the way, I should look it up as we're talking, but Royal Flash was made into a movie that was supposed to be the kickoff of a series in the late 70s with Malcolm McDowell playing Flashman. And it was really, really great, but I think it was a financial failure. And that
I've been thinking the whole time reading it would make for a great movie, and I was wondering why Flashman had never been translated. I wonder if casting might have something to do with that. I don't know if I should check it out, but I don't know. Well, in my mind, I'm not really picturing McDowell type character. I almost think
young McDowell. I mean,
young McDowell.
Young McDowell was like the mid 70s.
I was thinking. So here's my casting suggestion.
Yeah,
I think different countries, but if you could get Chris Hemsworth in his comedic mode, I think he'd be a pretty funny Flashman because the thing about Flash is he's a soldier, sometimes a reluctant one, but he is kind of a big strapping individual who's also a terrible coward. But I think you need a character who kind of looks the part, but then of course his actions betray that he's not really what you expect, right?
Well, these are books that are, to put it mildly, with in the sort of the British tradition, deeply unpopular with the British
Yes.
literary circle. These were Thatcherites loved the Flashman series.
Yes.
Unapologetic imperialist bastard, and the world in which he travels unquestioningly. And so I think that plays some role in, say, the BBC, as far as I know, not
wanting to promote,
not doing a 12-year series, which they adapt the Flashman novels, because the opinions that he expresses and the worldview that George MacDonald Fraser had are
not Kamala Harris's worldview.
Pretty much. I think that's very, very fair. Okay, so Flashman, Royal Flash is your suggestion, George MacDonald Fraser. I think there are 13 Flashman novels. Yeah. So if you actually develop the taste that Matt has, you will have a year's worth of entertainment.
It's the lifetime reading plan. Yeah, I just go from character to character now. That's I'm set.
Okay, well, we'll be back tomorrow. For Abe, Seth, and Matt, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.